Hello! Today I thought I would talk to you about audiobooks. They're not really something that I'm overly versed in, and I don't talk about them much. I did do a video a few months ago, which I will link down below, which was all about listening to audiobooks when you don't overly absorb information that well that way, and when you find them quite difficult to follow. So check that out if you're interested. But in case you hadn't guessed from the description of that video, I don't really absorb books very well in a listening format. I find that I zone out a lot. I find complex plots really difficult to follow without having the choice of flipping back through pages, and generally, yeah, I just find that I don't enjoy books as much when I listen to them on audio. That said, it's recently come to my attention that there are some books which I think I have enjoyed on audio that I probably wouldn't have necessarily been standout books for me if I had read them. And to prove that point, one of these books that I'm going to talk to you about, I have read in physical format and didn't really get on with it, and in the audio format I really enjoyed it a lot more. So I think with some books, although dense, heavy books are, for a lot of people, I think, kind of hard to follow on audio, I think there are books which are well suited to the audio format, specifically non-fictions. But anyway, we'll get into that along the line. So I've got 6 audiobooks here to talk to you about, which are all audiobooks that I have thoroughly enjoyed and that have been sort of 4-star reads for me, and I thought I would just go through a few. If you are somebody who struggles with getting to grips with audiobooks, I think this would probably be a useful list for you. I think it's likely that you would enjoy these books as well, that none of them are too heavy, none of them take too much concentration, and I think they are well suited to the format because of that. So I'm going to start, I've got 3 fictions and 3 non-fictions. I'm going to start with the non-fictions because personally I think non-fiction is ideal for audio. I think especially if somebody is reading their own non-fiction, it's really lovely. Like, I have tried to listen to a few historical non-fictions and heavier non-fictions, and they haven't been that great, but I find that self-help books or memoir-esque kind of non-fictions work really well in this format. A few that I have listened to in the past year and thought were worth a mention are If I Could Tell You Just One Thing by Richard Reed. This is a little audiobook. It's not that long. I can't remember how long it is, but I think it's about 4 hours. It's not long at all. Richard Reed narrates it, which I really enjoy because he had a really soothing voice, and he basically just goes around talking to all kinds of famous people, and getting their advice, the one piece of advice they would give to somebody, just general life advice. And he talks to such a diverse range of people, from Simon Cowell to Margaret Atwood to explorers who have hiked in the Arctic. He talks to them all, and I think it's just a really lovely book, and it's one of these that actually throws up the question of whether some books are better suited to audio, because what I really loved about this is that each of the chapters was about 5 minutes long. So when you had just 5 minutes here or there, you could put it on, listen to it, and it was just a really lovely little boost. That said, I think if I had read this and read it straight through, I don't think I would have enjoyed it. I think if you did read it, you would have to read it just in snippets. But I think it worked so well as an audiobook, and I think it definitely probably suits that format better, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Then I have Shrill Notes from a Loud Woman by Lindy West. I read this at the start of the year. This is also narrated by Lindy West, which I really enjoyed because it is kind of a self-helpy memoir, confession-y kind of book. I think it really benefited from being narrated by her. I can't remember a huge deal about this, but I really, really enjoyed it. It's basically a kind of self-helpy memoir, where Lindy West talks about her struggles as a female and also as a larger female, and the sort of just trials and tribulations she's gone through in her life, and also tying her weight back to all of those, and how her weight has been treated and how she's kind of stood up and fought back, and it was just really empowering and lovely. And I think if I had read it as a book, I don't know if it would have stood with me. I think it probably would have been kind of mediocre. But because you had Lindy West's narration, it was just a really lovely, again, uplifting little listen, and I really thoroughly enjoyed that. And finally, I have Not That Kind of Girl by Lena Dunham. Now, I have heard really mixed things about the book of this. For the most part, people say that it's boring, that they didn't enjoy it, but I did enjoy the listening experience of this. I can see why people might have thought it was boring. It's not the most 500 laughs a minute kind of audiobook, which you might expect from Lena Dunham, who, by the way, narrates it herself. I forgot to say that. So again, it's got that personal aspect. But what I really enjoyed about this was Lena Dunham's narration and just the way she was explaining these awful situations that she's been in through her life, and doing so in such a deadpan tone. I just think what's best about Lena Dunham is her kind of dry, kind of self-depreciating humour, and I think that really comes across well in this. So if you're hesitant to pick up the book because of the bad reviews, I would recommend listening to this on audio. Then we're on to the fictions. So the first one I have is The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. This was narrated by Peter Kenny, which at first bothered me because it was a book by a woman narrated by a man. However, because Harry August is obviously a man and he narrates it first person, it kind of ended up working, and I really enjoyed Peter Kenny's sort of dry humour as well. This is a book that, on paper, it shouldn't work as an audiobook, and even as I was listening to it, I was like, I don't know if I should stop listening to this and just read it, because I'm enjoying the story. I don't know if it's suiting the audio format, but actually, as it went on, I realised that, you know what, it's a book that's going to be confusing no matter how you experience it. But I think if you're reading it, you probably would spend a lot of time going back and trying to make sense of where you are and what's happening, and I don't think that particularly helps the narrative or moves the book along. I think it will just end up clouding you down, whereas when you're listening to it in audio, all you can do is take it at face value, and I think this is a book that's very much best taken at face value. It basically follows Harry August. He has 15 lives, as the title would suggest, and we basically flit around through his lives. It's a really interesting concept because it's not as though Harry August lives after his other life or before his other life. He lives at the same time as his other life, so he goes through the same experiences but with hindsight. And there is, I can't remember exactly, it's been about a year or so since I read this, but there is a ongoing theme. He's working with somebody who, for a few of his lives, he's paired up with, and then they become enemies in a few of their lives. So yeah, there is an ongoing narrative there, and you can just about grasp onto what Harry August is trying to achieve. But it just was hilarious, and obviously these people know that they are being reborn again and again, so there's always the threat of, well, I could terminate you for good. So there's a few times where you think someone's going to be completely killed off and then they come back to life. It just was hilarious. I think it could have been a bit dull and dry and confusing, but Claire North wrote this in a really comic way, and Peter Kenny read it in a really dry and comic sense, and it was just hilarious. In fact, I think the first line in this is something along the lines of, "This life started just like all the others," or something like that. It's just hilarious. I really enjoyed it. I think if you are willing to put aside your need to understand every single thing and just go with the journey, this is an excellent one for audio. Then I've got Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson, which was narrated by Jeanette Winterson, and that was the main appeal for me. I think Jeanette Winterson has such a lovely speaking voice, and hearing Oranges in her narration was just fantastic, because though it's not based on her life, it's not a memoir, it is kind of got pieces of Jeanette in there, definitely. So listening to it from her narration was really lovely, and this is actually the one that I have read in the past and didn't overly get on with, but actually I found that listening to it, I picked up on things that I hadn't picked up on in the text version, which is interesting because I always assumed that I missed more from the audiobooks, so that's something worth considering. And then finally I've got the Georgia Nicholson books by Louise Renison. I've read the first two on audio. These are also narrated by Louise Renison, which I just think is fantastic because her grumpy teenager voice is the funniest. I missed out on these when I was a child. I think by the time I became aware of them, I was too old to enjoy them. So yeah, I just never went down that route. But when Louise Renison sadly passed away a few years ago, I decided to give one of the audiobooks a go, and I just loved it. Again, I think these are books that would probably not necessarily stick with me if I read them, but they are funny. They are really funny, and obviously Georgia Nicholson is quite a selfish, unpleasant teenager. Even though you love her, she's not nice at times. She's not the best. Because the book is written as a diary and Louise Renison is playing Georgia Nicholson, it's just hilarious and you love her anyway, and it's just so good. And obviously she's got her own sort of quirks and languages, and she abbreviates words and says her own little words, and it's just so funny. I would definitely recommend listening to these if you haven't read them. Even if you have read them, I would recommend listening to them. They're easy to listen to because obviously they're for younger audience, and they're just so funny. So those are a few of the favourite audiobooks that I've listened to. Please let me know down below any easy listening audiobooks that you've really enjoyed and what makes an audiobook a standout read for you, and I will see you next time. Bye.